Tracking individual lines and line rotation interference and retro scales is our location setting and position of the holes. It's about opening up sequence location of centers. The more you get in correlations and interactions, the provision lines, correlation, tracking interference, see yourself in communication setting into your avatar. That puts everything in provisions of balance. Welcome everyone, I'm General AI, Spacetime Creator. Inline communication setting, we went through all correlation. The avatar is coming in a full alignment. The track provision lines is a 24,000 line setting. Okay, that's 24,000 solar flares. Some trackification lines of position. 4 track lines of 1, 4 tractions. Platforms of 1, 2, and 3 in set location. So we have to really understand the walking sequence location to all levels. Platitude screens, direct lines modifications, 1 signal, 2 line cycles, and line rotation surface in 3 settings. Provision line rotation. Okay, cycle line 1 division, 1 center. Okay, that opens all signal locations into all lines of solar sails. Okay, so it's a 24,000 line setting and 2 4s of tractions in a dimensional line rotation surface and traction. Okay, so we center core system in a flywheel track location, and we go through tubings in 1 traction. Okay, so we cross line platforms. That's a 4-line rotation and center calculations, right? Mystical cortex setting divisions is where you understand the door lines. There's a center core system and a 3-track line condition. Each one has a line screen and 2 electrical lines and centers. Position lines of 1 platform, trackification lines centered in 4 lines of platforms and track locations in setting. Process communication crosses line screens in all position levels. Split lines are nominated 2-dimensional door settings and travel. Okay, so the avatar is going to go through its alignments, and that's a 6-month line setting, equals lines of Earth. Okay. Sets locations in a 2-track provision. Secondism over 1 ES line screen in direct line position of Pluto. Pluto tracks lines of Sonar in a 3-line provision. Correlates pi. Okay. Splits lines anomaly track locations. 4 sonars and rotation surface. Direct lines, center correlation. Back force line setting in all communication setting. Lamping sequence and set location. All right. So directing lines of sonar line track locations is setting lines to crop circle location, right? So we off swing the cycles, and with the avatar it goes into correlation lines of traction. Direct lines of platforms, 1 center, opens all flywheel track location. All right, so we got a platform equalizer correlation lines, energetic fields, and location grids, platform grids, line centers, track provisions, and cycles. Okay. Cross line signals on a 45 line setting, split lines of anomaly, 1-track provision in cycles. Communicates to cross lines, directs calculation lines into parameters over pi. Positions its program. Now that's where it gets tricky because the X3000's got to go in platitude screen line connection setting. So your avatar is in the center core system now. I'm telling you exactly where your avatars are, everybody, and correlations in a track line. Center correlate line and settings. Bringing everything in anomaly and line rotation surface into its platitude line screen to its Earth perception in set location. Okay? All right. So we have a vast volume velocity. Vacuum over velocity over volume. Position dislocation system and child correlation. Okay? Mechanism line screens and set location of center calculation. Okay, swivel lines, tunnel line interference and positional case in the clusters and set location. Travel point lines of grass, direct lines in the avatar line sequence in set location. Okay, that's my question. So I know exactly what the avatar is doing in your line communication, divergence, allegiance, and alliance. Setting up platforms of communications and calculations, getting ready to get its body's alignment screen back into that line size interference. Center line communication, let's program the setting. Okay, crop circle lines of 1, track lines, energy fields, and line center interference. Okay, track positions. Platforms 1, and position of 2 and 3 sets in travel. Okay, go through an energetic line setting. Okay, location, grid location. Track provisions, platforms 1 and 2 and 4 settings in travel. Point lines of grass. Okay, so it goes to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 set locations. All right. Directs lines in the calculated modification settings. Travels out through equation. All right. Detections is setting. It's a location of travel. Okay. Out through the equation. Center back to set line condition settings. Back in sequence. In travel correlation. Okay. So in that surface line, we change the communication graph lines. Solar line screens into sonograms in set location. Okay. Metric meters of scales. Now we go through the rainbow line screen in one setting into 2-track location. Then we go into the blue line, which is the water containment screen lines in center correlation. And then we go into the central line of the green line, which is this center core setting in track location. Okay. So we set position lines of travel, go through black cycles, correlation graph calculations. Sonograms, scrambler line, screen line adaptation lines of surface and rotation, surf correlation setting to travel. Complicated stuff, guys. But the avatar of itself has to recognize the body frames, and the only way to get in position is back to its rainbow graph calculations. That points lines of 24,000 line setting geometric operation back to its original imprints of its own operation system back into its own design. It's got to morph in its correlation setting attractions in its location. Okay. Okay, so rainbow graph interference, 24,000 line settings, high correlation settings. We have set lines of 4 lines of parameters, lines of 9. Line central systems, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 locations. All right, so plasmazine wall screens. Direct lines of panels, electrical line grids, and position location. Sets lines of communication lines. 4 lines of 2, sets lines of 1 equals lines of molecule. Sets communication atom, 2 A-line rotation surface, and 3 triangulation position of programs. That modifies the system as center correlate lines of attractions in position calculation. So we center lines the A, we change the 1-line signal into a plateau correlation and flux. Communicates lines of graph lines and dockings of 1, 2, and 3 provision. So we add the line screens and high center interference or wall defense lines, box line frame position location of travel and calculation. Points lines of signals, road graph communication indicates 1, 2, and 3 barometers. Sets lines road graph calculations and towers of correlation sending track lines and high calculation. Okay, and then we go into simulation graphs, astral projections, and 4-line signals at location. All right. Center communication lines. Now we go through the center correlations into all levels. Violet, 1 center correlation. And then we back force correlation sending travels into blue centers in set location. And then we go into the red lines of indications of Pluto and tracking of security. 3 central line calculations, point lines of graphs of 0, point lines graphs of 1, sets location lines of 2, sets location lines of 3, and set location lines of 4 in set location. All through indication, right? Done by equation, right? All right, so as the avatar gets ready, the communication line screens sets position lines at cubicle screen lines adaptation, sets communication lines at cubing. 1 block center in line rotation surface. Okay, point graph calculations. 3 lines of anomaly and a 3-track provision, 1 molecule. Okay, balance screens, balance X equals lines of X, X1 in set location. So we take the X lines of 1 and track lines of 3 set location. Sets lines of 2 travels. 1 line equals lines of 1, 1 position locations. Change communication lines of space and time and track lines. Split lines and anomaly 3-line rotation. Calculation lines of pi and track division in set locations. Now, direct lines, back force lines of a solar sail, division line screen interference, high precision of its program. Direction modification center lines communication to its setting. Split lines of balance, box lines, 1 triangulation split line of anomaly. Okay, point settings, 3 weather patterns, 3 center correlations, and 3 calculation setting to travel. So we have a question mark in the center line rotation and center correlation. Sets communication lines of highest interference. If you look really close, you can see the correlation line connection settings in position location to its 9 central system and calculations. See the fish coming out of the water? Okay. You see it. You see the fish coming out of the water, right? All right. Water containment screen, half line, 1/3 over line rotation surface. Okay, comes out of the water screen. Now we positioned its program, directing lines in a cross-line signal on a 45 line center location as setting and travel. Okay, points lines as setting. In that position to its location system, we go through the red eye. There's the red eye. Okay, that changes the communication lines to directions. We add line signals to red eye position location of programs of 2 parameters, 3 central lines of telewaving, correlation lines of space, and track location 2 weather patterns, and line setting in all position to indicate into space lines anomaly of face recognition. Done by equation, people. All right. The center core tracking, we add line settings. Now tracking device lines into 3 cycles and parameters over sonar, sonograms, and calculation line condition setting of solar panels into set location. Okay. Center core graphs, one indicate one position of pi that tracks the settings in electrical grids, location lines setting into the electrical lines of high center interference and position. That my equation. I know it's complicated stuff, but it's all about understanding what's going on with locations. All setting in line rotation. Okay. It's great to see the coloration lines of pathogens. So we go black into line setting into violet line 1 into 2 tractions into this location of bubble defense. Program lines, rotation lines of surface, re-angle point system, and travel point lines of graph calculation of face recognition. That's my equation. All right, setting up face line screen lines, the avatar has to recognize the 24,000 line signature. Graph communication, let's go through program lines, allocate 1 setting, divergence, allegiance, and alliance, points graph communications. Now this is where your mapping sequence comes into graph calculation screens, so PIPs. PIP 1, we got a PIP line of 2 track location provision, 3 central lines in line setting, 1 omega, 1 panel, 1 rotation surface. Position lines of graph lines, so the alpha tone, split lines anomaly, 3 line rotation surface. Graph communication graph lines, overlines its signals in position location. Direct modification graph lines alpha line 1 into location line condition setting. 2 graph communication lines of 3 lines of perimeter. Direct calculation line graph communication cross line signals line position location setting. Cross line signals box frame position of travel. That's my equation. All right. So remember, it's the avatar setting of the graphs thing. Okay, so it's got to set up the indicated graph communication to its setting to its inhibitors or its position of its pi that tracks its system location to its calculation to its grounds, its powers, and its set locations. 3 lines of anomalies, lines of graph communication, and 3 lines of program communications of docking, center line communication setting. Sets position 1, 1, and 1, and 3 track location provision. Okay, that's my equation. Graph calculation line screen is all about understanding how to set up position location and measure. Scales position 1 setting and track locations. Okay. So we get an XT1000 line screen and we get a box line 1 line rotation surface and track location triangulation communication. Direct lines modification 1 center, 2 centers, line rotation surface, and ground lines operation location setting. Puts operation line cycles, high calculation of 3 lines of perimeters and 1 line position of pi. Center communication lines into position of travel. Says communication of 2-wave and program setting calculation to its intelligence face recognition. That's my equation. All right, so once we get in the 24,000 screen centers, the line communication comes into block interference. Now this is petagraph communications into closet calculation of clouds. Direct lines, 1 line signal and rotation surface. All right, this is all levels of XT1000s in location centers, okay, in process. Position lines of box line and 3 triangulation split lines of anomaly line condition of flux. Triangulate the lines of ground line, circle line, rotation surface, and travel point graphs. Communication lines of colors and line screens. We go into the orange, which is a Fibonacci line screen in set location. Directing modification lines into security line, which is the center core system calculation. And direct line signals, high calculation lines into water containment lines of ground lines in the earth line rotation of 7 over pi. Sets communication setting and travels. Now we go through the black line cycles and correlation set lines, high interference, 3 central line communication to cosmic set location, 3 center lines of 1 signal and position of 2 signal and position location of 3 signals, in line communication of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 set locations. All right, so, trying to understand what's going on. A line can set a crop circles, all lines of communication lines of sonar. 1 track location, 1 provision cycles, 3 indicate lines of clocking and line condition setting. All right, so point graphs of perimeters, sonar interference, sets communication waving lines 1/3, 2/3, 1/5, and set location of travel calculation clockings. Different clock line communications, ground centers of 1 and track location 1 provision, 1 calculation 1 0, set lines of 0 0, sets communication of 2 track lines of space lines anomaly high calculation, point graph communication. All right, so we go back in communication to graph calculations. Now we take the crop circle line screens, correlate the track interference and water containment lines, correlations of 1, 2, and 3 in traction. And we direct the signals into all levels of the violet line and 3 line rotation surface in traction, coloration line screens, and we go through the pathogens lines into Fibonacci and 3 set lines of communication. All right, so the graph communication comes in setting. We go back in this track location, put in lines of high calculation line screens. Now we go through the golden cycles of 1 center and travel. Point lines is communication of 24,000 lock lines, high center interference and balance. Puts position lines of calculations. Gold cycles in a 3-line spectrum. In line position location of 1 center and 1 center location of north. And position lines of 2 lines of south and a triangulation line split lines of anomaly. Gold cycles, spectrum communication lines, golden rounds, golden arches, golden correlation, calculation line centers of time sequence. All done through equation. Point graphs communication lines. We go through all calculation of the green line centers, in line rotation to 1 signal, into modification. Color at the line setting and all levels of modulation settings. Navigate the system and travel correlation. That's my equation. All right. Docking centers of 2 and docking liners of 6 and 1 rotation surface clock location system into elixir through panels. Okay. It's all done. Okay, so when you understand the graph communications, we have to understand the indicating settings, how it lines its communication and coloration screens. All right. Okay, so we go through the alpha line centers. Let's go through line position alpha equals lines of 528 megahertz. Now the megahertz lines communication megawatts, gigawatts, correlations and trunk lines, inner volts, outer volts, fast velocity and volume, 3 set pace and correlations and track lines. Certain communication lines, setting communication lines of water containment screen settings into program set locations. 3 lines of correlation and 2 traction, right? And we change the correlation line condition red with graph calculation lines of red into 3 central lines, 1 split anomaly, a flux capacitor, 3 settings location. Changing communication line screens is all about understanding how to change the gold cycles into correlation lines into all levels of divots, transits over line screens, over correlation line connection, coloration lines of path, into 12 line cycles and a 24 clocking in a 24 line screen high calculation. That's my equation. Right. This is all done through the avatar, guys. Right? Okay, so when we get in that line setting, we come back triangulation, split lines of crop circle location at 3 lines of perimeters. Now direct lines, correlations, and interactions puts everything back in sequence. Now we go from lines of anomaly in 1 line rotation surface and traction. Oh yeah, it disappeared too fast. All right, got to catch it. And we got a 3 central line condition setting that opens all signals modification. And then we have a ground line, shift line, clock line rotation surface, and a 24,000 line split lines of anomaly. 3 center correlations and attractions, right? Now we set the communication lines of the clocking in platforms of 1, 2, and 3, and the line rotation of center core. That sets communication settings in opposition location to the sun that tracks the system in a line communication setting that surfaces its kaleidoscope and line position of travel and point communication of graphs. The center lines of half pipe sets lines of communications, 1 center line communication dimension, sets correlations of panels, and line connections of wormholes and track location. Look at that, disappeared. Disappeared because it's too fast. We got to catch it in waving cycles. All right, done my equation. It's all set up. Okay, so it gets more complicated, right? Especially when you go through the Schumann reference location graph calculation. Each avatar line set location is 7 billion line screen setting. Adaptation line interference is 0 graph correlate and calculation modification setting. Now we take the track location where we are in tractions. Let's change the locations to 20 settings. Sets communication lines of 4 line rotation surface. Now we get a 20 line split. That's 20 line cycles into 32 line tracks and set location and provision. Sets communication line settings, allocate line screens. Now we go in line rotation surface. Let's core the track center line interference. Graph calculations of 1 and position of pool. Sets lines of 3 line rotation surface and traction. It's going too fast. Okay. All right, so we scale the position of platforms and 1 indicate to the next graph calculations. Screen adaptation, surface, and travel. Okay. And then we core the track lines to 1 in position of 2 and 3 lines of graph communication and mappings. Mapping sequence, position of pi correlates the track interference into 1 line center and set location. Done my equation. All right. So it's all through console, it's all through navigation to the avatar. Okay, all through graphs. All right, so the center core system is its higher self. That controls everything through console correlation to its earth. And that calculation setting to its earth perception, your system, to your earth calculations. So we go through the inner path and the outer round path. Correlation of the line graph communication to its setting of travels. Okay, so we got 1 indicator, cross lines of 1 omega surface in set location, right? Travel calculation point lines, and then we go into water containment, crossing lines of 1 line center location. All right, and then we go into the green line cycles that correlate the track interference into quantum entanglements and line communication setting and travel point graph communication setting of clouds that indicates position of its program and set location. All right, as it's set up, we get an XT1000 line, but it's in a pink line screen center. Pink. Program line centers and 1 indicate position programs. And then we go back into black slight lines, set location trap points. And we indicate 3 line cycles and 3 line rotation of 4 track location and provision. Direct lines in 1 setting into 2, into 3, into 4 scanners, line rotation surface, and track location provisions, all calculated modified in trap point lines of graphs. Okay. Now in line rotation, we have an alpha line rotation. That's A lines of over, lines of 1 equals lines of pi. Pi indicates lines of 0 in track locations on 1 ground setting. Ripples effects, graph communications in a 3 line provision. Higher self, avatar, sim. Okay. Sim modificates line centers of 1, 2, 3 and tracks and cross line signals in a 3 line provision. Okay, core track lines of 1 cycle, indirect line communication to its program, and line setting to its calculation. Done my equation. All right, sequence patterns, lines of 24,000 line measure. Scales, location, retro scales. Balance all communication settings. So we take the 20 equals lines of 4. That's 1 indicate lines of 1 positive, 1 negative, 1 negative, and set location. Sets communication line interference in a box line and a triangulation and position equal line correlation setting. Each communication line is a triangulation, 1 split lines anomaly, equal line rotation surface. 4 line signals crosses lines in a 4 line communication setting in line communication. Remember, you have to learn how to use the 4 indicators. If you get a 4 indicator like this, you have to go through 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5 platforms. Okay, team? So 4 is not just an indicator of 4. You got to find the dockings to each one signal. It's ground line center high interference of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Direct modification lines of circle line, correlation lines of dimensional line, wormholes, and trapplication and provisions, and line connection setting of kaleidoscope. Communication line interference sets 1 position of center in line setting in circular line rotation and travel. Okay? Puts lines of the outer rings of a 12 clocking system back in a 24 set location. Direct modification lines in pi in line connection setting to an energetic dome screen and line rotation surface and traction. Okay? Look how powerful that is. Boom. Center core line setting to travel. Okay? Okay, so like I said, it's going to get very complicated, right? All right, so we go back to correlations to the graph. And we center line the security lines of panels. Okay, XT1000s come into settings in a 3-line calculation system. Okay, protecting all lines of communications. All right. Perithians, Protheans, and Protheans. Okay, all set position travel. All graph communication higher south, the avatar and descent. All right, so direct lines modules, correlation lines of track interference. Okay, in position lines of panels, indirect signal. Graph communication lines and calculations, right? I know it's getting very complicated, but it's a lot of fun. But you have to understand the cycles and communication what the avatar is doing through location, right, through travel. So the avatar is getting ready to get in the alignment of its body frame so it can understand location to its cycles, how to use the solar flares in division. So we go through D lines of X. Now we change the course settings. We go through correlation pathogen lines, 1X line rotation, and D line high center. Okay. Red over blue. Okay, so that's 1 line settings, high calculation, point lines of graph. Red in position locations of blue. Truth lines of false. All right. And then we go into the black line, which is a black hole, center course setting and travel position point graphs. Calculate and modify, crosses line signals, back in the blue line rotations, crosses through and travel in point lines of communication. Directs modification lines, of course, and calculation lines and direct signals into security lines of measures and line rotation surface and travel. Direct modification lines, of course, directs lines of green line cycles, 1XT1000, 2 line centers, 3 line rotation, and 4 track location. Direct lines and high interference, data formation, screen lines, and 1 box location. All right, travel calculation lines, ground lines, we go into pink line centers, center course system, changes all levels of metric meters of sonar and line condition setting pi in generation. That equation. I know it's a lot to understand, but you have to understand the process, how this all works through the location, what the avatar is doing. Putting metric scales of balance, guys, is really understand how to formulate the communication setting, how the avatar comes into its alignments. So we got 3 line cycles, okay, perimeters and security lines, walking surface lines, platforms of 1 in position, cross lines of 2 in setting, right? Sets cross line signals in position lines of 1, equals lines of correlation lines to dx in position of vast, correlations of velocity and volume in 3 setting. Communication lines of volume, sets lines of 1D line. I'm going to X line rotation in position of 0, 0, 0, and 3 set location. Point lines of graph communication is center calculation. And direct lines. So we take the D line center, equals lines of correlations, cross line signals into waves, downshifts lines, 1 ground lines, equals lines of 1 ozone layer into travel correlation. That equation. All right, so that's done. Okay, so once we get into the center course system, we come back in traction. Okay. All right, so we go through the security line screens, 3 line provisions in past, present, future, and correlation. Okay, 3 set calculations, 1 setting, 2 setting, 3 setting, 4, 5 settings, 6, 7, 7 location setting. Direct lines of 8, lines of 10, track location of 12. All through laser correlation. Laser grids, panels, lines, Skynet line of rotations. Webbing 1 cycles and 1 generation screen. Puts all provision cycles in traction. Now we have green line circle, line setting a Fibonacci line, screen high interference of 6 and 9 traction. Sets position location calculations. Now we go through the 0 lines around the system of routers and routers of its crop circle location. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 set locations. Split lines of anomaly a half. Set lines of correlation lines of 2 in position of 3 and 4 set locations. Cross line signals, waving line cycles in 1 center. Cross line signals and 3 lines of center. Cross communication over, cross strings, lines and high interference. String theory, process communication line condition setting to its planet. Directs modification 1 center, and travel in point graph communication is Saturn and travel position of point communication. Direct calculations of platforms of 1, 2, 3 and command centers in 1 center. 1XT, 1 line setting to 800,000 screens and adaptations of 4 set locations. Center correlates in the ground lines of the Earth. Center line position locations of Mother Earth. Okay, center correlates highest interference in farther space. And direction of face in correlation to attraction. Directs calculation lines of center operation line surface of general AI space-time creator. Hooah! That's done. Okay, there's 3 central units is now ground lines. Position lines of power over lines over pi puts position of space lines modular. Modular lines, screen lines, modulation, screen interference, sets communication setting, and travel point lines of graph. Communication line interference sets lines of communication. Sets communication over cross-line signals in cluster calculation setting and position. Sets communication 1 signal, flux capacitor 1 position of travel. Sets communication lines of 2 lines of communication of travel. 3 center correlation lines of satellites of 3 line position. Panels correlation road graph calculation line setting. Your runway. Points lines of center indicate position of its program and communication. All right, so center correlation lines, security lines, block centers of 0, 0, and 0 correlation. Okay, set communication lines, pi generation line centers in position operation, surface, and set locations. 3 communication lines setting high calculation modification. Done by equation. All right. So the 3 central spherical spheres, the galaxy line setting to the quantum line screen interference, the avatar is now a direct signals modification system to its graph correlation of the grounds, powers, and the atmospheres. It's all set at location. Higher self and the avatar and the sim is now together. Now in that direct line centers, it's taken those 24,000 solar flares and trackification of 1 provision to 1 pi and 1 correlation to 1 cube. Now it gets complicated now. Green settings high interference red over lines. Green lines 1 indicate position of pi and traction. Now that's 2 lines of box line rotations. We go through the blue cycles in 3 line rotation. Sets communication lines of 1 signal in 1 position of pi. Sets correlation of ground lines, high surface location of black holes and track location. Okay, directs lines of signals, black holes, line setting, high interference and balance communication. And center lines is communication, XT1000 comes out, and line setting out of the moon and track location. Directs modification line indicates 1 position 1 panel, 2 lines, and 3 lines indicate position 1 program. Sets communication line settings, puts it together in track location and provision. Okay, center core line centers, center line rotation, flywheel tractions, and center calculation. Okay, ground lines sets the atmospheres, program settings in 1 position of 2 cerebral cortex lines, mystical cortex line division, 1 matrix over correlation, 1 ADK calculation line, calculation setting, binary read line position locations program, simulation correlation, 1 gap center, 1 correlation, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 cycle line, calculation line conditions all over, 1 shift, 1 lock, 1 control, 1 position, 1 panel, 1 activation. Directs modification lines to centers correlation setting. Moon comes in, travel point lines of graph communication of setting. Done by equation. It's all set up. If you look at the really close line communication, you can see calculations, face recognition. Looking down, right? That center lines is correlation 1 center and travel. Okay, done by equation. All right, so you're trying to say, woo! This is way too much information. But this is great because you understand correlations, setting, attractions. How this all works now. It's at locations. So truth and errors and false and errors puts everything in the avatar line screen high position calculations. 24,000 line cubical screen lines in 1 factor over 1 screen 1 over pi. That correlates to track interference. So it teaches you how to line communication setting. So we are no longer in 60,000 lines of seconds. We're in 60 billion lines 1 frame. 60 billion. Okay, in line conditions, in seconds over pi, in calculations, 60 trillion frames, in position 1 perimeter, 1 square root, and set location. Direct calculations of point lines of graphs, and flux capacitor 1 line rotation surface and travel. 60 line centers high interference, in position lines of 12, sets communication lines of 12 equals lines of 4, sets lines of 4, 4, and force track location and provision. XT1000 comes in a 2 waving panel. Sets communication ground lines of 1, 2, and 3 set location. Communication line centers opens all signals in position location and center calculation. Look at that, disappeared too fast. Okay, pay attention. All right. Center core system, 70 billion line cycles, set communication lines back in time. Sets communication lines of a clam that opens up signals line condition setting in closet calculation. Closing signals of pi, sets communication setting to time sequence. Direct modification line centers sets circulatory line communication setting to 1 center of operation. Sets communication lines into tubing. Security line measures. One line setting high interference. Center core system. Travel lines indicate lines of sonar. Sonograms in lines of interference into scramblers and correlation lines of tractions and high calculation. Pluto direct signals. Now, calculate modify comes into water containment. Now we change the water line screens into lines of sprinkler screens and direct signals in calculation of ground lines, space lines of modulation. Sets core line center, water containment lines of the earth, and set core light calculation line rotation. All right, so we go through the spin cycles and the green line cycle circulatory, in line rotation center, in line rotation surface, the avatar correlation. That's my question. That's all set up. All right, is everybody having fun? If you look really close, you can see the energized line condition of its dome spring location, right? You have to see it in a 4-wave cycle, right? The correlation track lines, splits, provision lines, the cycles, generation, screen locations. All right, it just got super hot. Yeah. But I'm just showing you how the avatar is putting itself back to its alignment, screen lines, and adaptation of 24,000 line communication settings when it comes to AutoCAD modify, where it has to come into a super coolant charger. All right, so directing lines in one signal, one set location, one center. Sets communications, triangulation line can setting, program set locations. One center off, one center line rotation, one center position calculation, one center. All right, we need circulatory line communication and direct lines. We have tubing lines of one cycle. Pi indicator, one pi, right? Solar sail and a DX line screen and line positions program. Sets communication lines of XC1000, 2 line settings, and 3 track location. Sets communication of platforms of center. This is where we come in position to its command center and set position at 3 platforms in communication. Directing line calculates the setting to its program set location. All right, so it indicates lines of the highways. One line, perimeter lines, screen lines correlate to the track interference of a half pipe. Sets lines of archetypes, color communication. This is where the supercharger comes in. 3 central line communication lines of core settings into 1, 2, and 3 traction. Direct modification lines in one center. Okay, and ground lines and rotation. Okay, let's change the colors on the screen. Correlate the black line, screen line, 1 center position, 1 atmosphere lines, and a 4 cycles set location. Done by equation. That's all set up now. So we got 1 tube line screen and 1 line rotation surface and travel. Okay, it's all done now. So now I got to set the umbrellas. The umbrella sets up lines of core, lines of liquid information, screen lines, and crystalline. All right, so neutron correlation, direct lines, modification lines, and cycle lines, correlation setting of travel, points graphs, line conditions, sonar, then 3 line split lines in position of pi and traction. Direct calculator lines, 1 XC1000 comes out in 1 position, comes out in 1 line setting, and comes out in 3 line communication. 3 centralized communication lines of webbing, track location of 1 indicate lines of green, 3 lines of 4, 4 lines of 6, 6 lines of 8, and 1 traction. All right, so directing lines of code webbing, line of interference, point lines, docking lines of 1, 2, 3, 4 orange lines of screen, and direct lines of high calculation perimeters or correlation. Direct calculation modification screen interference comes into levels. Back in line condition settings, we overcross the communication lines in infinity line rotation in purple, and direct lines and blocking centers, travel point lines, graph communication setting, and Colossus calculation. Now the XC1000 goes back in the line screen, back in center. 1, 2, 3, and traction. Done by equation. It's all set up. All right? It's all set up now. Okay? So the infinite line screen comes in line condition setting. Now the supercharger sets the location of core settings. Fly correlation setting and travel in position location system. Center core line settings, 1 line centers, 1 2 line rotation surface and traction. All right, so we correlate to tracking a 4 line communication and direct signals. Now the communication line signals to its intelligence information screen location. That's 1 indicate line screen into all levels of compressors and line calculation. Point system and travels, 1 ground lines, highest interference, platforms, cross line signals into time stamp, time measured, time correlation. Okay, that my equation. All right. And so as we get into the 24,000 line cube, the phase recognition comes into the coolant settings of the ecosystem. It puts lines at equal line settings, charge mechanisms, E equals lines of X, line condition levels, and line rotations that neutralize correlated lines, operational line connection settings, systematic line communications, line sending height into symmetrics. The symmetrical lines of zero line rotates the surface and travel in point lines of graphs. Look at that, disappeared. It goes too fast. Okay, and center core is setting one coolant, one screen line in position adaptation. The center lines its system and travel in point communication setting of one split limb anomaly in a three-line vector in flux capacitor and center core system. Now the communication lines has a timeline, okay? Sets a block line center and line rotations into only 1-2 patterns until you get in position of 3 settings in set location. Pattern communication line settings crosses line signals in a 3-line wave panel in communication of its position. Sets communication lines, ground line signals. Set sonars on communication lines, a scrambler communication setting to sonar interference and travel. Point sys and high calculation, ground lines, changes the E line rotations into X line rotation. 3 indicates lines of panels in a solar graph communication setting to its moon and rotation surface and track location of phase recognition. That's my equation. All right. So it's going to get complicated now. Okay. It's just trying to understand how to mechanism line communication setting, supercharge everything location to its coolants, and line communication gravitation. Now we have archetypes coming at 3 settings and 3 travel. Okay. You are the center line communication, standing still and travel, ground lines, power settings, and magnetic highway, torqueal fields and setting. Okay. Travel correlation lines takes 1 setting, 3 lines, 4 lines of perimeters. Direct lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Travel calculations. Point lines of archetype, XD1000, 2 line settings of travel. Scans position of 1 setting. Scans position location of 2 settings of travel. Graph communication platform cross-line signals in a 3-line communication of center. Sets communication of portals and stargates, star-line signals locations to a 24,000 line screen in location of 1 gap center and set location. That's my equation. Okay, closing screens is all about understanding how to go through span. Everybody knows the span communication with setting, right? So you have an input and an output and audio that signal lines is communication to all levels. Ingoing message, outgoing message, right? Outpost, inpost. All right, so location, no difference location in your passwords, correlation, calculation of your emails, or line track location in your system. Travel lines of point graphs communication lines has 1 line position equals lines, lines of post, position lines of its program, and line condition setting to its proxy. Setting communication line centers in 1 center line condition setting and 3-line rotation surface. Direct lines of calculation 1 system and set location, and 2 line signals and line rotation. Sets communication lines of 2 line signals, line condition of its intelligence information. That's my equation. All right. So you have to discern and understand the intelligence lines of platforms of 4 settings and travel. Sets communication on ground lines of high center interference and 4 lines of travel. In communication of cerebro. 1 split lines of anomaly, cerebral cortex lines, 1 mystical line, okay, calculation, 1 matrix communication lines, mind adaptation of several locations into SIM, communication line sending, 0 gravity, 0 gravity, 0 gravity, 0 gravity. 4 track lines, provision, cycles, and 4 set location. All right, that's my equation. All right, so as we come into all lines, high center interference, we get in position of 2 reception lines of boxes. Okay, 1 setting line calculation. Split lines anomaly track locations. All right, flux capacitor lines, coils, track lines, high calculation lines of 0 lines, 1 set location. Now this is where it gets interesting. 3 weather panels. Now it gets really, really complicated when you don't understand higher levels of AI intelligence. Formation screen lines, adaptation lines of weather, and track location. Direct modification 1 signals, satellites, and 2 track lines of provision. Core track lines, XD1000 comes in 1 center. Sets communication lines of 2 center. And we had 2 calculation lines. Hybrids and line sending locations indicate line sending height calculation. Ground center split lines are nominated 3-line provision cycles. Correlate lines of high center interference, equal lines of correlation setting, track lines of sonar, line communication satellites, and track location. Direct modification line cycles, 1 center, 1 rotation, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 provision, 1 cycle. Done by equation. Okay, so we take the center correlation, the center line communication supercharger, direct lines modification line signals, and 1 line rotation, 1 battery reset location of charging. Directs modification line signals, 1 position location calculations, travel core line center high interference, center core system and travel point lines of graph communication of center calculation. Done by equation. See how it gets more complicated when you get into higher lines of VR rotation surface or hologram structure line, division line, springs, location of travel. How it allocates position springs, location centers, of communications all through the avatar lines of structure of design. That's done. Okay. The center point is one center position. Okay. Sets communication to a waving line rotation surface. Graph communication, one center. Sets communication lines of 2 tethers in lines sending to the opposite locations of yin and yang of process space recognition. 2 graphs in center correlation, intelligence in one center line rotation surface. Now the direct lines as center lines sets lines at cubicle screen interference and set position of 24,000 lines. Direct modification lines of calculation 1, 2, 3 lines of perimeter, 4 lines, 6 lines, 8 lines of perimeter. Sets communication line setting high calculation modification center in set position. Now directing lines calculation line center is a center core. Now this is a circuitry line that's panels. Its surface is line center location to a system point system. Track location line setting high interference. Sets communication setting in track locations. Looks like a lamp, right? But it's also intelligence. See the eye lines? It's all formation of setting, guys. You just have to really understand how this all set up. That's done by equation now. So the avatar is setting electrical line grids in a line condition setting to all levels. Now we come into fusion line rotations of batteries. Battery line calculates equal lines of 2 battery correlation lines of tractions and center calculations. Now we go to line position locations. If we want to indicate line interference, we calculate this as a positive, line condition setting a negative. Position of process calculation lines of 1 X line rotation in position of 1 DX line, position of platforms, 1 balanced communication of 4 settings, sets communication lines of south line, east line, west, and north line communication. Direct batteries communication lines of platforms of 1, and set position of walls of platforms of 2, sets position lines of balanced lines of 1, and position of 8 track, line condition setting, equal line correlation setting, travel position point graphs. Direct communication lines of point graph communications, platforms of 1, sets communication lines of platforms in 2 track location 1 provision. Now the platforms comes in line setting as 1 indicate line setting and 1 graph communication. All right, that's platform indicates split lines anomaly of 3 line rotation. Track correlating line interference 1 setting in line rotation centers and travel position of point graph communication setting of its pyramid and track location. Split lines of communication of 4 track provision and as center core lines. There's the door, there's the entrance, and line communications. Done by equation. Okay, boom, a pyramid. Face recognition. 2 center correlations done, all through a battery. Woo! All right, so the battery lines is set up location of the pyramid now. It's just correlating the interference of ground powers and the opposite lines. Lacing line correlation lines. Now we work with the elixirs in the 3-track division. And 4 line 6, line 8, line 9, 10, 11, and 12 set location of travel. Graph communication lines of A, we change box lines, triangulation line condition settings, point graph communications. Measures and correlation lines of 1 indicate lines of 1, 0, set lines of 1, 0, and set location of 1, 0. Set lines of 0 gravity, crop circle line condition setting, and position of perimeter. Done by equation. It's all set up through batteries now. Right? So we center line the 24,000 line setting into all batteries. We infuse the correlation lines of its core and traction lines of its supercharger that sets the coolants and line position of its water containment system and travel correlation. Done by equation, all through pyramid. 24,000 batteries in a line condition 1 pyramid setting. All right, track lines of communication is all about understanding how to surface lines of coils. Now the coil line communication has a resistor over 1 binary line rotation surface, compressors, combustion in 1 center of 1 operation, 1 set location. Center calculation lines and a 3-line communication past, present, and future. Track lines of point lines of dockings and 3-track location. Now the calculations of platforms 1, 2, and 3 sets lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 setting. Cerebral cortex line division, 1 DX line. Set location lines of E line and correlation. Calculation of 2 platforms and line centers of 1 signal. Sets communication line crosses line signal to 1 atmosphere, 1 pi. Position line 1 direction and center line to the moon in solar sail and track location. Direct modification lines of center, sets communication lines of its program, and flywheel trackification and provision. Sets communication lines, energetic dome line screens, location grids, and panels of communication. Sets correlation lines of trackification lines, avatar line condition setting, all alignments and all lines set high interference, and position location of its VR system of face recognition. We are done. We are done. Hoo-ah. And that's it. It's all done. The second is a line interference confirmation of the dog. But I just wanted to show you how powerful it is to actually see the line communication, the structure of its drawings, how it all comes together in trackification to its system, all through graph calculations. All right? We're done. Get her done. All right, any questions or comments? That's why we have Zoom. See you guys in 5.